Red Vickers was the mind, Lucas Cain the muscle, and Elijah Park the ghost in the wires. Together, they built the most feared criminal empire America had ever seen. From blood-soaked alleys in Chicago to encrypted networks no one could trace. The Crimson Vultures weren't just a gang, they were a machine of chaos. But every empire has a weakness, and every predator leaves a trail. This is the shocking true story of how ambition, betrayal, and terror collided, and how one FBI agent dared to hunt down America's most ruthless gang. In the early 2000s, Chicago's South Side was drowning in chaos. Gang wars were a daily routine, and law enforcement had long lost control over certain neighborhoods. Out of this violent mess rose a name that no one saw coming: Raymond "Red" Vickers. He was just 23 when he decided to walk away from his former gang, the Iron Fangs, after a violent shootout left most of their leadership dead. But Red wasn't looking to escape the violence. He wanted to master it. He understood that brute force alone wasn't enough. To dominate the streets, he needed precision, loyalty, and fear. And so, the Crimson Vultures were born. At first, they were barely noticed. A few robberies here, some drug pickups there. But what made Red different was how he built his empire. He didn't just recruit fighters. He pulled in smart kids who knew how to hack, guys with military experience, and even corrupt officials who could look the other way. While other gangs were busy fighting each other, Red's crew was growing silently. Every member had a specific role: logistics, surveillance, finance, enforcement. They operated more like a private army than a street gang. Red was a ghost. He never used phones, never appeared in group photos, and never stayed in one place longer than a few days. His orders were passed down through layers of trusted lieutenants. He made sure no one person ever had the full picture, not even his inner circle. That secrecy protected him and made the gang nearly impossible to infiltrate. By 2006, the Crimson Vultures had taken control of 2 major drug routes on the South Side. But they didn't stop there. They moved into gun trafficking, identity fraud, and even infiltrated the trucking business. The gang's discipline and order made them unlike anything the city had seen. They didn't do flashy drive-bys. Their hits were clean, efficient, and often left no trace. The only calling card they left behind was a single red feather placed on the bodies of their enemies. The city started noticing when crime scenes began, connecting. 3 rival gang leaders were found dead within the same month, each executed with a single bullet to the head. No witnesses, no signs of struggle, no surveillance footage. Just the feather. The media caught wind and gave them a name: the Crimson Vultures. For Red, the nickname was perfect. Vultures didn't kill for fun. They cleaned up what others left behind. And that's exactly what his gang was doing: cleaning up the chaos, replacing it with cold-blooded control. In just 2 years, the Crimson Vultures became the most feared name in Chicago's underworld. Other gangs either folded or joined them. If someone refused, they simply vanished. Red built alliances with cartels from Mexico and weapon smugglers from Eastern Europe. His crew even had fake passports ready for quick escapes and safe houses, spread across 5 states. They were ready for war, but no one dared challenge them. While the public remained mostly unaware, local detectives began noticing patterns. But by then, it was already too late. The Vultures had someone on the inside, a detail no one confirmed, but everyone suspected. Key evidence kept disappearing, arrest warrants would get delayed, and witnesses either changed their stories or disappeared altogether. The fear wasn't just in the streets, it had seeped into the system itself. Red's rise wasn't driven by rage or revenge. It was methodical, almost surgical. He didn't need to raise his voice or make threats. His reputation did all the work. People who had never seen him in person feared him more than the cops. He wasn't a myth. He was a reminder that true power didn't need to scream. It just needed to survive, to expand, and to wait for the right moment to strike. By the end of 2007, the Crimson Vultures weren't just a gang. They were an institution. And at the center of it all was a man with no known address, no digital footprint, and no official record. Just a name whispered in fear. Red Vickers. Lucas "Butcher" Cain was not the kind of man who stood in the shadows. While Raymond "Red" Vickers was the ghostly mastermind behind the Crimson Vultures, Lucas was the monster everyone saw and feared. He earned his nickname not just for his cruelty, but for the surgical way he dealt with anyone Red marked for elimination. Before joining the Vultures, Lucas had served in the U.S. Marines. He was deployed twice to Afghanistan and once to Iraq. He came home with medals, scars, and a mind wired for violence. When society failed to reintegrate him, Red found him and gave him a new purpose. From that moment on, Lucas became the Vulture's most feared enforcer. Lucas had a code, one that didn't believe in second chances. If Red suspected someone of betrayal, Lucas didn't ask questions. He didn't make threats. He just acted. His first major assignment came in 2008, when a dealer named Rico Torres was caught skimming profits from a heroin shipment. Lucas handled it personally. Days later, Rico's remains were found scattered across 4 neighborhoods in Chicago. His head was discovered in a cooler, left at a local precinct's front steps. His limbs were dumped at known rival territories, and his torso, unrecognizable, was found burned inside an abandoned car. Each site had one thing in common: a red feather pinned nearby. The city panicked, and within days, 3 other low-level Vulture members turned themselves in, begging for protection. That was Lucas's message to the rest. Loyalty wasn't optional. It was life or death. Lucas didn't enjoy killing, at least not in the way people imagined. For him, it was a duty, a skill, an art form. He studied his targets, followed them for days, waited for the right moment. His methods weren't just brutal. They were psychological. He wanted people to know they were being hunted. He wanted fear to spread before he ever pulled the trigger. And it worked. Gang members began moving differently, speaking in hushed tones, paranoid of who might be listening. No one wanted to be next. As the Vultures expanded, Lucas's reputation grew. Rivals didn't just fear death, they feared his version of it. He began traveling outside Chicago to handle special assignments in Detroit, Cleveland, and even Atlanta. In every city, the pattern remained the same. The body count rose, police found no evidence, and a red feather was left behind. But his most disturbing work came in 2010, when the gang's operations caught the attention of law enforcement in a serious way. Detective Maya Rollins had been quietly investigating the Crimson Vultures for nearly a year. She was smart, careful, and determined to expose the gang's inner workings. Her colleagues didn't even know how far her investigation had gone. Then, without warning, she vanished. Her last known location was a diner near Belmont Avenue, where she had met with a potential informant. Her car was found 2 days later, burned and stripped of all evidence near the Belmont train yard. Her badge was melted into the dashboard, but her body was never recovered. While there was no official connection made, everyone knew who was behind it: Lucas Cain. His signature wasn't the red feather this time. It was the silence. A message that even the police could vanish if they dug too deep. Lucas wasn't flashy. He didn't post photos, didn't drive expensive cars, and lived in temporary apartments that changed every few weeks. He operated like a ghost with a weapon. He had no personal ties, no family, no distractions. All he had was the mission and Red's trust. But beneath his disciplined exterior was a growing obsession with control. He began eliminating people not just for betrayal, but for minor mistakes. Someone who forgot to relay a message on time. A runner who lost track of a package. Even a lookout who fell asleep. Red began to notice the shift, but by then, Lucas had become too valuable and too dangerous. The FBI started catching whispers about the Butcher during wiretaps and low-level arrests. The name alone caused suspects to freeze. Even hardened criminals refused to speak about him. When asked about the Vultures, most would say nothing. But when asked about Lucas Cain, some broke down in fear. It became clear that the Vultures' power didn't just come from strategy or money. It came from the terror Lucas carried with him. Every shadow felt like a threat. Every mistake felt like a death sentence. As the gang tightened its grip on the city, law enforcement knew they were dealing with more than a criminal organization. They were facing a machine, and Lucas Cain was the blade that kept it sharp. By 2012, the Crimson Vultures had become more than just a gang. They were a sprawling underground empire. Money flowed in from drugs, weapons, and extortion, but it was their foray into digital crime that changed everything. Red Vickers, always steps ahead, understood that the next war wouldn't just be fought in alleys or abandoned buildings. It would be waged in data centers, servers, and financial networks. To lead this transformation, he recruited a quiet, unassuming tech prodigy named Elijah Park. At just 26, Elijah had already been expelled from 2 universities for breaching school networks and accessing sensitive government systems. For most people, he was a ticking time bomb. For Red, he was a gold mine. Elijah didn't come from the streets like most vultures. He grew up in a quiet suburb in Illinois, raised by immigrant parents who dreamed of him becoming an engineer. Instead, Elijah fell in love with code, lines and loops that made the world move. When Red brought him in, it wasn't with threats or promises of money. It was with freedom. Elijah was given his own crew, his own equipment, and total autonomy. His mission was simple: make the Crimson Vultures untouchable. Within months, Elijah transformed the gang's operation. He built encrypted communication networks that law enforcement couldn't crack. He hijacked security cameras, erased footage before raids, and used drones to monitor police activity. Under his watch, the Vultures no longer relied on cash. They moved into cryptocurrency, laundering millions through fake shell companies and online casinos. But Elijah's true masterpiece was Project Blackout, a silent worm that infiltrated the city's infrastructure. It could disable power grids, crash police databases, and wipe criminal records with a single command. Red ordered it to remain dormant, a weapon of last resort. But just knowing it existed gave the gang unshakable confidence. Despite their growing reach, cracks began to form. With more territory came more enemies, and more internal tension. Some of the older vultures resented Elijah's influence. They saw him as a keyboard soldier who never bled for the gang. One of them was Damian Knox, a brutal enforcer from the early days, known for his explosive temper and history of insubordination. Damian believed the gang had grown soft, too reliant on tech, and not enough on fear. He began questioning orders, refusing to work with Elijah's surveillance teams, and even hinted at breaking away with a faction of loyal street soldiers. Red watched from a distance. He had always encouraged power struggles within the ranks. It kept people sharp. But Damian was different. He wasn't just a threat to order. He was a threat to survival. And that made him dangerous. Elijah warned Red that Damian had been trying to hack into secure channels, possibly to leak intel to rivals or law enforcement. Red didn't flinch. He issued a quiet directive. No spectacle, no message. Just remove the problem. Lucas Cain handled the job. One night, Damian was found hanging inside a construction site, wrists slit, body staged to look like a suicide. But everyone knew the truth. The red feather left on the steel beam confirmed it. The message was clear. Loyalty to Red was not a choice. It was a condition of breathing. That killing sent a shockwave through the gang. The old guard grew silent. The new recruits followed Elijah's lead without question. And yet, beneath the surface, fear was taking root. Not fear of rivals or cops, but of their own. The Crimson Vultures had become so powerful, so deeply wired into the city's veins, that no one felt safe, not even those on the inside. But unknown to Red, someone had been watching. A low-level informant, arrested during a petty robbery, had been quietly feeding the FBI breadcrumbs, names, locations, financial patterns. Nothing conclusive yet, but enough to open an active investigation. The Bureau assigned a seasoned agent, Carter Miles, to lead the case. Carter had a reputation for dismantling cartels piece by piece. Unlike most, he didn't believe in quick busts. He believed in watching, waiting, and striking when the system was exposed. He didn't want Red for a weapons charge. He wanted to dismantle the Crimson Vultures completely. As Carter began his quiet pursuit, gathering pieces of a puzzle no one else could see, the Vultures remained unaware. Their empire looked invincible from the outside, but inside it was beginning to rot, and Carter was ready to dig until the entire structure collapsed. The first crack came quietly. In the spring of 2013, an unexpected cyber attack hit one of the Vulture's hidden offshore accounts. Millions in crypto vanished overnight. Elijah Park was furious. It wasn't just about the money, it was about exposure. Someone had found a way through layers of security he believed to be unbreakable. At first he suspected an internal leak, but the breach was too precise, too deliberate. It felt like someone was sending a message. Behind the scenes, Agent Carter Miles had assembled a covert task force of cyber and field experts. Using the intel gathered from the informant, they had reverse-engineered one of Elijah's smaller laundering systems. The stolen funds were bait, and the Vultures took it. Elijah's reaction, however, was controlled. He moved fast, rerouting systems, scrubbing digital trails, and ordering his crew to tighten every node in their web. But even with his swift action, Red Vickers sensed a deeper threat. For the first time, their power felt vulnerable. Red's confidence, which had once made him untouchable, began to waver. He didn't show it, but those closest to him noticed subtle changes. More meetings, stricter protocols, and an increasing silence. Carter Miles continued his methodical hunt, avoiding large operations that could tip off the gang. He focused on the smallest details: bank transactions, phone pings, unusual travel records. He followed the money, and it started painting a map. Over 18 months, Carter built a complete web of connections stretching from Chicago to Mexico, Romania, and Dubai. One name kept surfacing: a logistics broker named Arthur Bell, who unknowingly worked with shell companies run by the Crimson Vultures. Carter made his move. Arthur was arrested under tax fraud charges. Scared and confused, he flipped within hours. Through Arthur, Carter uncovered the real structure of the Crimson Vultures. Their empire wasn't just street-level crime. It was built on a foundation of global trafficking and white-collar fraud. Carter finally had what he needed: a warrant to launch a coordinated multi-state raid. But he needed a crack big enough to force Red into the open. That opportunity came through a mistake Elijah didn't see coming. One of Elijah's junior coders left a data trail while accessing a protected database. It was small, but enough for Carter's cyber team to trace back to a safehouse server. That server, once breached, revealed surveillance logs, payment records, and most importantly, locations. Red had always believed in changing safehouses every few weeks. But one site in Indiana hadn't been used in months. Carter believed that Red might have grown overconfident, thinking no one would look there. The task force moved in. At 4:18 a.m. on a cold November morning, federal agents surrounded the property. Inside, they found outdated files, abandoned devices, and one major break: a fingerprint. Matched within hours, it belonged to Red Vickers himself. It was the first physical evidence tying him to the Crimson Vultures. Red, now exposed, went underground. He cut off all communication, leaving Elijah and Lucas to operate alone. Tension grew fast. Elijah wanted to flee, erase all traces, and start over abroad. Lucas refused. He believed they needed to stand their ground and fight. For the first time, the two most powerful men beneath Red began to split. Then came the final blow. One of Red's lieutenants, desperate to save himself, agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. His testimony revealed names, routes, bank accounts, and even details about Lucas Cain's murders. The court sealed the documents, But the FBI knew the time had come. A nationwide manhunt was issued for Red, Elijah, and Lucas. Lucas didn't run. He stayed in Chicago, preparing for war. But Red vanished. No sightings, no messages. Elijah disappeared from every system, wiped clean like he'd never existed. It was over in weeks. Lucas was killed during a shootout in an abandoned warehouse. Elijah's fate remains unknown. Red? Some believe he escaped to South America. Others think he's still in the U.S., hiding in plain sight. The Crimson Vultures dissolved, their legacy buried in court records and body counts. But law enforcement never found Project Blackout. Elijah's digital weapon, still buried somewhere in the city's grid, lies dormant, one command away from chaos. And so the fear remains, not of what the Crimson Vultures did, but of what they left behind. A silent reminder that sometimes the most dangerous threats don't die. They wait.